Can Macklin Celebrini save this franchise? We look at that today on Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen today every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube and on Sirius XM. So, like I said at the top of the show, we are going to be talking about Macklin Celebrini today because the Blue Jackets, just despite the fact that they won a game, they just decided to keep losing this season. So they're going to be in the conversation for first overall. I have got Hadi Kalakeche from Locked On NHL Prospects here. And like I said, we're going to talk all about Macklin Celebrini, what kind of player he is, how he could fit into the Blue Jackets, what he needs to do to become a game-changing NHL player. So I'm just gonna get right into it because Hadi is much smarter than I am and says much smarter things than me. There's really only one option at first overall this season, just like last season. Instead of the Bedard draft, it is the Celebrini draft, and I don't think that's going to change. So I figured, hey, the Blue Jackets are they're in the basement again. Didn't think they would be, but they are. So here we are talking about Macklin Celebrini. I've got Hadi Kalakeche, one half of Locked On NHL Prospect, to come and talk a little bit about just how good Celebrini is, because my instinct is that he's very good. What kind of player are we getting in Celebrini, Hadi?
It's weird to find him a comparable. I can't really give you many examples of players in the NHL that are as dynamic off the rush as Celebrini. He's the type of player who's just so terrifying for defenses because all he does is attack downhill, with pace, with force. He cuts to the middle at all costs. I can give you a tier of player that he would fit in. And that's the kind of Stamkos, Nico Hischier, Braden Point type of tier, like not generational, team defining player, but a player who's going to be extremely good, put up a really good amount of points and just be impactful on a regular basis. But yeah, you'll mainly see him just attack you off the rush and just terrify defenses every chance he gets in transition. But he's actually gotten really good at playing inside the offensive zone as well. We saw kind of glimpses of that with Team Canada. You're talking about a player who finds space really well, works the boards really well. He's not necessarily the biggest guy, but he works himself. He works his weight really well. He's 6 foot 190. And he's out-muscling NCAA defensemen that are 6'3", 6'4", 215 pounds and doing a great job of it and an easy job of it. So it's just the technique is so refined, but, I mean, you get raw skill with Celebrini at the end of the day. Raw skill, raw speed, and just an aggressive mindset off the rush that you rarely see in prospects this age.
Where do you see him? Obviously, the easy comparison here is Adam Fantilli, who tore up the NCAA in his freshman year, and Celebrini is kind of doing the same thing. Where do you match those two players against each other? Obviously, they're very different kinds of players, but where do you see those two guys? I see them
as two players with really similar upsides, but I mean drastically different play styles. Like at Fantilli, a lot of his goals came off forechecking, winning board battles, and getting off the boards in the offensive zone, and just kind of winning pucks back for his team. Celebrini, the way that he plays is mainly, like I said, off the rush. He's a player who a lot of his sequences with the puck and a lot of his goals start in his own zone. He's not necessarily the one making the defensive play, even though sometimes he can, but a lot of his plays start with him being well positioned in the defensive zone and just exploding out of it, whether on the puck or off of it. That's not really the same sequences you see from Fantilli regularly. That's not his kind of brand. But their upsides are really, really similar. I think that Fantilli at his best will reach that tier I was talking about, the tier below the game changers, the franchise defining players, but still players who can put up 90 points, 100 points easily with the right environment. And yeah, having two of those on the same team would be really, really good for the Blue Jackets. And yeah, I mean, overall, those are two players that I could see complementing each other really well as well. Because Celebrini can do a lot of the rush offense. He can carry the puck up the ice, shoot it on goal after cutting inside, and then Fantilli's just kind of lurking right behind him, looking for the loose puck on the rebound. Like, that would be a really interesting combination of skills that I think could work out really well. But they're not the same player, even though they're putting up similar numbers in the NCAA and doing similar things. The way they approach the game is wildly different, and watching them, you can see that pretty obviously.
Yeah, and I think that's, obviously the Blue Jackets are they're in the conversation for the first overall. It's going to be real tough to beat out the Sharks, who are committed to being just as bad as humanly possible this season. But I think having a player of a similar tier to Fantilli, but a drastically different play style, I think is a recipe for success. It feels a little bit like it might be kind of a break glass in case of emergency pairing. In the way that, like Crosby and Malkin don't play on the same line together, barely at all anymore. But having that 1-2 punch down the middle of Celebrini and Fantilli, or Fantilli and Celebrini, whichever way that shakes out, I think is something that there's a reason there are a lot of people in my comments saying that the Blue Jackets should lose every game from now till the rest of the season. I'll say that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's also a drastic drop off in talent between 1 and 2. I think Celebrini is by far and away the best prospect in this draft, and you'll see it in the rankings. There's never been a doubt since the start of the year that Celebrini is the best player in this draft. There hasn't been a single ranking that's come out since the start of the year. There's even the ones that are contrarian and looking to get clicks for hot takes are still like very much. I mean, you can't ignore the fact that Celebrini is the best prospect in this draft. So if you do win the lottery, you're getting the best player by far that's available here. And you're getting a player who, like you said, I think that's a really great idea to have them both on separate lines and have them put together in case of an emergency. And I think that's a great comparison with what's going on in Pittsburgh with Crosby and Malkin. Obviously, to a lesser extent, because Crosby's, one of the top 5 players of all time, but, it's a similar idea of two players that complement each other really well, but that benefit their lines separately really well as well. And then when you're losing by 2 and you need a goal in the last 3 minutes, all of a sudden they just pop up on the ice together and just do some absolutely ridiculous things. I think that'd be a great idea. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how it's going to play out between Fantilli and Celebrini, which one will end up being better. It's way too early to kind of get into that. And their ceilings for me are too similar for the moment to kind of separate. But yeah, I think in whichever order you have them, it's a really, really good 1-2 punch. And if Columbus can surround them with some really good kind of developed wingers, players who can, do the things that they don't, complement each other and complement them really well. I mean, I think that's a real good recipe for success. You obviously build success through the middle, and Fantilli and Celebrini is about as good as you get in the middle.
In a minute, I'm going to go back to my conversation with Hadi all about Macklin Celebrini. But first, I want to tell you guys about FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite snacks, and placing some great bets. And I don't know about you, the snacks are my favorite bit, but FanDuel is making the betting so much easier than it needs to be, or so much easier than it ever has been before, let's say. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who's going to win Super Bowl 58, but they also have bets for which player is going to score a touchdown, how many points are going to be scored, and so much more. New customers joining today, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just go in, find the heaviest favorite you can. Doesn't matter what sport, doesn't matter what the bet is. All you have to do is bet $5, and if you win, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets that you can spend on whatever you like. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and also us, the Locked On Podcast Network. You talked a little bit about the kind of the drop-off in talent after #1. And there's always conversations year in, year out, like you said, of, maybe Shane Wright's not the consensus overall. Is anyone going to challenge Bedard for #1 overall? And, is there anyone that you think could, if they, turn it on and have just like a monster end to the season? I talked with your co-host, Sebastian Hyde, last week about Ivan Demidov and what kind of talent he is. Is there a world in which you see him kind of turning the Jets on for the second half of the season and maybe kind of supplanting Celebrini, or is the gap just too Like, is the gap too big?
It's a tough one because I mean, Demidov is currently just. I mean, he's flipped a switch and he's up to like 2.5 points per game over his last like 10ish games in the MHL and in the Russian Junior League. So, despite that, I still just see a drastic difference between what Celebrini brings to the game and what Demidov does. Because Demidov is by far and away, he has by far and away the best hands in the draft. Like they're better than Celebrini's for sure. Just Celebrini's faster. He's a more efficient skater. He's more likely to cut to the middle, which is a really translatable tool for prospects and gets them to the next level really quickly. And I mean, I'd even say Celebrini's a better defensive player, even though it's kind of tight. So I mean, there's a massive step forward between Celebrini and Demidov in terms of physical tools. I think Celebrini also thinks the game better than Demidov, but Demidov's raw skill. I mean, if he had spent the entire season just clicking at this rate, maybe there's a conversation. But even then, it's a maybe. I have Demidov second overall currently. I think Sebastian does as well, and it's for a good reason. I mean, he's a supremely skilled player, but Celebrini just brings so much to the game, and I think he can step in the NHL right now and have a fantastic impact off the rush. It's that good of an area of his game. Like, I can't stress this enough. You can see the fear in defensemen's eyes when he's skating at them. Like he's terrifying barreling down the ice like he does. So yeah, Demidov's hands are amazing, but he's doing what he's doing against junior Russian defensemen, which is like if you've ever watched an MHL game, it's the most shambolic, chaotic defending you'll ever. It's not like no. I don't want to crap on 18-year-olds, but it's like it's actually just like you think the OHL is bad defending, you haven't watched the MHL. Like it's terrible. So like, can he bring that to the next level? I don't know. Celebrini right now is playing against men and doing great with it. So it's just there's too much at stake at first overall to take a risk like Demidov, even though I think it's likely that they reach kind of similar ceilings and maybe Demidov can outplay him in terms of raw upside, but there's just no denying what Celebrini can bring to the game, and his upside is as high as Fantilli. So I'd be really surprised if anyone else gets picked at first overall.
Yeah, I mean, it could happen, but I'm not putting any kind of real hope into it. Like I spent a lot of time trying to manifest the Ducks not picking Adam Fantilli in the draft last year, and hey, that worked out for me okay. Yeah. So maybe there's something there. Obviously, no prospect is perfect. You know, I know Celebrini is the best one in the draft by miles, but is there any kind of concerns in his game, or like what do you want to see him start to do when he hits the NHL level that will kind of help him take another step? Is there anything that he's doing right now that, like, if he does that in the NHL, it's not going to work, if that makes sense?
The only thing I'd point to is sometimes he stops moving his feet when he hits the defensive zone, and he's mainly just kind of rovering and looking for an opportunity to blow out the zone. Like he has a really good offensive mind, but it is its downfall sometimes because he's thinking purely offensively, which he's still good defensively. Like when he decides to get involved, when he realizes like, hey, my teammate needs help, he gets in there, he does the job, and he does it well, but he doesn't realize that often. And that's his main kind of setback right now. I feel like with time, he can develop that part of his game. And I mean, defense in general is one of the things that comes with time. It's very, very rare for players at 23, 24, 25 years old to not start figuring out the defensive side of the game. And especially when they've already figured it out mentally, they just haven't figured out the logistics of it, right? I was talking about this earlier with some scouting people. Overall, we were talking about some skills that develop later on and that develop naturally, and why they develop that way. I think it's because defense, in terms of its logistics, is so theoretical. It doesn't have to do with instincts or just understanding or feeling the game. It's theoretical. It's where you have to be, where your coach wants you to be. How do you position your stick? It's all theory, right? So I'm not worried about that coming in Celebrini's game. I just, I think right now he's focusing on helping his team offensively as much as possible. So that's my caveat to the one thing that I would say Celebrini needs to work on, which tells you how complete of a player this is. Like the only thing he has to work on is something that I'm adding huge asterisks to, being like, this is going to come naturally. So yeah, I don't think there's any doubt with Celebrini in terms of, him busting. I don't think it's a realistic possibility.
Thanks once again for making Locked On Blue Jackets your first listen of the day every single day. Why don't you make your second listen the Locked On Sports Today national channel? Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sport 24/7 streaming channel. Is he a guy that steps into the NHL immediately, or do you think there's a chance that he goes back to he's at Boston University? Yeah. I always get BC and BU mixed up. Does he go back to college? Does he step into the NHL and just make teams' lives miserable?
Yeah, if Fantilli made the NHL in his draft +1, I think Celebrini makes the NHL in his draft +1. Fantilli had some more clear weaknesses, some clearer setbacks in this game, and you can kind of see it. You can see him kind of moving around the lineup for that reason. Like, he's not a complete player. Celebrini's a bit more complete, and a lot less raw. So I think that overall, yeah, I'd be extremely surprised if Celebrini doesn't make the NHL off camp. So, yeah, he's that good. I mean, he has the talent to make it, and yeah, I don't think there's any doubt there. He's going to maybe play a couple games at rookie camp, then immediately get signed because the GM's going to be like, oh yeah, he can do this like immediately.
Yeah, it's going to be another case of he's a little bit. His birthday is earlier in the year than Bedard's, I believe.
June birthday,
because I remember everyone was stressing about why Bedard hadn't signed his ELC, and then it turned out that he just hadn't turned 18 yet, which is wild.
He'll be 18 by the draft. Like, he'll have just turned 18 just before the draft, so we'll be fine. That won't be an issue.
I'm always so interested. Like, I know why late birthdays in the draft tend to be better players. Like, Crosby is an obvious one with a July birthday. Bedard and everything, but it's always so interesting when you look at when players are born and you can track that to like, oh, he's a June birthday, he gets like an entire extra year of development. Luke Hughes, I feel like, was another significant one where he basically, I think, just turned 17 at the draft or something.
I think it was an August birthday or something like that. But yeah, I think it's not just having those extra months to develop physically, but it's also facing competition younger in your development curve. Like, you're facing competition, 6 months before others. That's 6 months of puberty. That's 6 months of growing physically. Like, I feel like playing smaller against older competition develops so much competitive, compensatory skills, right? Where like you're finding ways to compensate for your lack of size, for your lack of strength, for your lack of speed. Other players are bigger, faster, stronger than you are, but you're outthinking them. You're outsmarting them in the offensive zone, in the defensive zone. And then once you catch up to them physically, all of a sudden you've lost your only competitive disadvantage, and you have a massive competitive advantage because you've already learned the technique and the physicality, like how to compensate for lack of size and strength. Like Celebrini, yeah, he's 6 foot 190, but he's going to be facing some. I mean, Tyler Myler is a 6'8". Like, we're not, there are physical specimens in the NHL. So being able to play against older and tougher and bigger and faster and stronger players earlier on in your physical development curve gives you so much leverage over those players, because you quickly learn to adapt, especially when you're as smart as a guy like Celebrini, or especially Connor Bedard. Like, there's a reason these guys are so good, is because this is nothing new to them. When they hit the NHL, this isn't anything they haven't seen before. Whereas, you'll take a 6'4", 220-pound winger and you just throw him in the NHL first year. Well, he just lost his first physical advantage, like his first competitive advantage. He just lost the size matchup, right? So for the first time, he's facing players as big and strong as he is, and they're smarter because they've already learned the stuff that he still has to learn. So that's usually why like smaller, younger players tend to like outperform their draft position, or just outperform players in general. It's mainly because of that.
Yeah, that's an angle that I hadn't actually really considered. I just was like, oh, well, they've been playing up an age group longer, but I hadn't considered that was like the ins and outs of that, really. The Blue Jackets are currently sitting at the time of recording this. I believe they are 4th in the draft ranking, in the draft ratings right now. Who should they take 4th overall?
At 4th overall, it's difficult because this draft's wide open after 2, so I don't know who's going to be picked at 2 and 3 yet. I think I have a I have a hunch that it'll be like Artyom Levshunov and Caden Lindstrom, which leaves you with still a bunch of options. If you're looking for a two-way center, Konsta Helenius is definitely up there. If you're looking for a pure dynamic offensive player who won't give you much defensively, but will just dangle the lights out every night, Berkeley Catton. If you're looking for a left-handed defenseman who's more offensive leaning, Zeev Buyam. If you're looking for a left-handed defenseman who's more defensive leaning, Sam Dickinson. And if you're looking for a pure offensive right-handed defenseman, there's also Zane Parekh. I think at third overall, they should pick one of Ivan Demidov or Zane Parekh, just because the upside with those two is just off the charts, especially Parekh. Like he could be a point per game defenseman in the NHL. He's that good. But I think that if you want to make sure that you get your money's worth at third overall and mitigate the risk of busting as much as possible, it'll probably be Konsta Helenius. I think that's probably where the Blue Jackets hold, especially with Fantilli as your 1C. Helenius as your 2C long-term, I think is a fantastic spot for him. It's a great spot for him to develop into one of the best defensive centers in the league who can also hold his own in terms of points. But there's just so much upside you're leaving on the table there. Like Demidov could be a top 10 NHLer if he's developed properly. Zane Parekh could be a top 3 defenseman in the NHL if he's developed properly. Like you're leaving a lot of upside, but I still think that's not bad. Like Helenius makes sense for the Blue Jackets if they go that direction, but for me, it's definitely either Demidov or Parekh. Both of them are just off the charts offensively.
Yeah, I was talking to Sebastian about this a little bit when we recorded last week about like I love when ranking season happens because it's just a bunch of scouts arguing about who should go third and who should go fourth. And so I'm expecting to ask this question, a handful of times as I do these profiles. I get a different answer every single time, and that's really fun. It gives me a lot to work with in terms of learning more about prospects. But
yeah, I mean, especially if you're like if the Blue Jackets stay at fourth, like I said, this draft from 2 to 10 wide open, could go in any order. So you're probably going to get 8 different answers. Like that's probably what you're going to get out of this year. Yeah.
It'll be fun. Obviously, we're all rooting for that number 1 overall pick.
Yeah.
Probably won't happen, but hey, we can dream. And if not, there's definitely some other options out there that can help this team. And that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow, we are going to do another prospect profile. We are talking this time to Sebastian High, and we are going to be talking all about Ivan Demidov, who is a really fun player that I think a lot of Blue Jackets fans would be excited to get. So we're going to talk about him tomorrow. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day every single day. We are free and available on all podcast platforms. We're on YouTube. We're on Sirius XM. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find Hadi at Hadi K _scouting, HADIK _scouting. Go listen to Locked On NHL Prospects. They do a great job over there. He and Sebastian. And you can find our show at LO _Blue Jackets on Twitter. You can email us at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com if you have questions, comments, criticisms. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.